Good morning, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
And I'm Vladimir Duterte. Thank you so much for joining us. President Trump is set to be on Capitol Hill later today to press House Republicans on a pair of immigration bills in the midst of growing backlash over his administration's zero-tolerance policy for illegal immigrants. A new CBS News poll finds 67% of Americans believe separating children from parents on the southern border is unacceptable. 17% say it is acceptable.
The poll also finds 62% of Americans disapprove of the president's handling of immigration, while 35% approve. CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reid is following the reaction.
We're doing the right thing. We're taking care of these children.
Last night, Attorney General Jeff Sessions defended the administration's zero-tolerance policy, which he first announced in April.
Hopefully people will get the message and come through the border at the port of entry and not break across the border unlawfully.
Newly released Department of Homeland Security numbers show 2,342 children were separated from their parents at the border from May 5th to June 9th.
I say it's very strongly the Democrats' fault. They're they're really obstructionist, and they are obstructing.
President Trump said Democrats should back a broad immigration bill if they want to end the practice of separating children from their parents who come here illegally.
The United States will not be a migrant camp. You take a look at the death and destruction that's been caused by people coming into this country without going through a process. And they could be murderers and thieves and so much else.
The president is saying that this is all on the Democrats, that it's their law. That's just not right. That's not true.
Outrage from lawmakers on both sides continues to grow.
All of us who are seeing these images of children being pulled away from moms and dads in tears, we're horrified. This has to stop.
It so challenges the conscience of our country that it must be changed immediately.
The children are not being used as a pawn.
A defiant Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen defended the practice.
We are trying to protect the children, which is why I'm asking Congress to act.
Senator Kamala Harris joined several of her Democratic colleagues in calling on Nielsen to resign.
She has, I think, evidenced again an inability to run that agency.
All right, let's break down with what comes next in the immigration fight. Let's bring in CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reid at the White House and CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe on Capitol Hill. Paula, to you first. President Trump is set to meet with House Republicans tonight. What can we expect to hear from that meeting?
Well, in this meeting, the president is going to make it clear that he's not going to support anything that doesn't give him funding for a border wall, border security, and an end to so-called catch and release. Now, as of a short time ago, the White House reiterated that the president does support the two major legislative proposals that are on the table from Republicans. There was some confusion last week when the president said he did not actually support a proposal that had been put forward by moderate Republicans. Now, the White House also tells us he has not had time to review that emergency legislation put forward by Senator Ted Cruz, but they are reviewing that and will get back to us on whether or not he would support that. But, Vlad, even with the support of the president, it's unclear that any proposal could successfully pass, given the deep divisions within the Republican Party and the need for the president to really appeal to his base that is demanding sort of hardline immigration reform.
So, Ed, Congress failed to pass immigration reform as recently as a few months ago. Back then, the issue that was supposed to push them to act was DACA. That just sort of fell out of the conversation now. Do Republicans really have a desire to pick this fight with midterms really just 5 months away?
They clearly do in the House, where they're going to have this vote this week. Whether or not either of those bills, as Paula points out, gets through remains to be seen. Where there's less of an appetite to do it is in the Senate, because you have a more closely divided chamber between Republicans and Democrats, and a bunch of Republicans running for re-election in states where this is a big issue. Nevada especially, Arizona, there's an open seat, and it could become a flashpoint in places like Tennessee. Given the urgency, however, of the family separation issue, I just ran in a little while ago to Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, who told me that he's already talking with Susan Collins of Maine and trying to find other Republicans and Democrats to come up with a plan that would narrowly focus on reuniting those families and making it law that should somebody come across the border with their kids, they'd have to stay together while they're being processed through the legal system. This sounds pretty familiar, though. Lindsey Graham and Susan Collins have been involved in previously failed bipartisan attempts to address this issue. So whether the song and dance is any different this time remains to be seen. But when you have Lindsey Graham and Susan Collins leading the way, that doesn't always usually lead to success around here when it comes to immigration, at least.
Paula, I know we've been saying this, you've been reporting this, others have been reporting this, but it bears repeating every time we speak to you because it's something that seems to be gaining traction not only with the president, but also now Secretary Nielsen, as you heard from the podium yesterday, talking about Congress needing to fix this law. Is there any law on the books that says that children need to be separated from their families? Is there any law on the books that says that parents and families need to be broken up? Just explain this zero tolerance policy from April to our viewers.
That's right. There is no law that requires families be separated when they come across the border illegally. 2 months ago, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, he issued a memo to all the prosecutors across the country saying, look, we're going to have a zero tolerance for anyone who crosses the border illegally. We are going to prosecute everyone who is detained after entering this country illegally. And once you decide to prosecute everyone who comes across the border, people need to be arrested and detained, and children can't be arrested or incarcerated for crimes. So the byproduct of this new approach is that families are separated at the border. And while there is no law requiring you to implement a zero tolerance policy, let's be clear. I mean, when you come here without going through a proper point of entry, you are committing a crime. There is nothing wrong with the administration enforcing those laws. But again, it's this sort of byproduct of children not being able to be detained with their parents. So the only real legal solutions that are out there right now are, of course, a legislative solution, which seems a bit of a long shot right now. The Attorney General could, of course, reverse course on this. He could say, you know what, we're no longer going to implement zero tolerance. We're going to go back to what it was before, which was that most of the time when you came into this country illegally, it was handled as a civil matter. You got a citation. You were released as a family unless there was some reason to believe you were a criminal. Highly unlikely that is going to happen, Vlad. I can tell you definitively after covering Attorney General Sessions, he's been working towards this. This is absolutely something he believes in. He's one of the few members of the administration who completely owns this policy and is completely committed to this as a deterrent. Those are his words, not mine. Now, the only other possibility is that the president could, through executive action, say that families can be detained together after a parent is arrested while awaiting prosecution. That gets around the law, that gets around the case law. I have asked the White House over the past 2 days multiple times if the president would do this as sort of a temporary fix. So far, I have gotten silence. So it appears that the administration is committed to this policy. And while some members of the administration say it's not a deterrent, the Attorney General is on the record last night saying the separation of families is supposed to be a deterrent to keep people from coming here illegally.
And speaking of the president, you know, he's been saying that the Democrats have to act if they want to change this. But throughout this whole conversation about immigration, the challenges that both members from both parties have sort of expressed, one of the main challenges is they don't know what sort of bill the president will actually sign. Do we have any more clarification about what bill the president wants to see in terms of immigration?
No, and we may not get it until tonight's meeting with House Republicans, and even then he may not clearly express what he wants. They have said repeatedly that the president wants $25 billion to begin construction of a border wall fence or a border wall and a border fence, that he wants to end the catch and release program, that he wants to see controls put in place to limit legal immigration and an end to what's called the diversity lottery program. But what's unclear is when he lays out those proposals, is he willing to give on any of them? And the attitude of the White House since he took office has been no. But the reality up here is that you may be able to get some of those things, but you're not necessarily going to be able to get all of them given the political environment, given that in the Senate you need to get 60 votes, which would require getting at least 9 members of the Democratic caucus to sign on, given that over in the House there are concerns among moderate Republicans who face tough re-elections this year about being seen as too strict on immigration, and concerns among the Democrats that the bills as written right now are too strict, especially because, among other things, they limit legal immigration. And then there's the issue of dreamers. The president earlier this year said, I'll give you a process for the roughly 1.8 million people who are eligible under DACA or who are dreamers to find a way forward to stay in the country legally. But again, you get into the details and you can't get them to get specific. And that is the trick here, is Republicans are so scared of crossing the president on policy and on most other issues. The most recent example, of course, being Mark Sanford, who lost his primary last week. Guys like Jeff Flake and Bob Corker will tell you that speaking out against the president has political consequences. And so with the elections fast approaching, they get skittish about getting into these arguments with the president for fear that he could withdraw support, have the party withdraw support, or that voters back home simply will be upset that they crossed the president.
Right. Paula Reid and Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much, guys.